we can move on. So I'm sorry, I will bring my welcome on behalf of Sandro. And I'm also happy to introduce my co-moderator, Cristina Alonso. Cristina Alonso is really not only the heart, but also the brain behind all these editions. Her dedication to the school is amazing, and I'm really, really thankful to all what she did over these 6 to 8 edition to allow this school to be in place. Cristina, thank you very much. You will co-moderate the session with me.
I will. Thank you for your kind words. But this is a joint initiative, and we couldn't do it without both universities and this nice and long-standing collaboration. So I think that we are a nice team, and it shows every year. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cristina. So I think we can start and we can really enter the program. This afternoon, we will pave the road to the innovative products. So as we learned from our welcoming addresses, the first step is to ensure that food is safe. So innovative food must be safe. And European Food Safety Authority, but also other institutions around Europe may help us as consumers to keep trust into the system. So now we will talk about safe innovation of food products. And the first speaker of the day is Takis Taskaleros. Takis is a representative, official representative of the European Commission, DG Santé. He is involved in the Food Processing Technologies and Novel Food Unit of the Health and Food Safety Directorate, so DG Santé. And he is by education a medical microbiologist, a molecular biologist, and a toxicologist. So he is definitely the right person to introduce us, to bring us into what the European Union is doing to ensure the safety of our food. And so, Takis, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me very well?
Yes.
Okay. I see here that I cannot control the slides, so I will have to rely on my colleagues. First of all, good afternoon to all of you. Thank you very much for, first of all, many thanks to the EFSA colleagues and the universities for organizing the summer school. I like the fact that we call it summer school into the end of September. That gives us a bit of prolongation of the summer season. I think being a Southern European, that is true. Summer lasts until end of September, maybe longer. But many thanks for that, and many thanks to all the participants. And also many thanks for the kind words. What I'll do for the next few minutes, actually, about 45 minutes or so, I'll try to give you a bit of a flavor on how the regulatory framework is structured when it comes to novel foods, as hopefully you'll see at the end of the discussion that we'll have here, the presentation would cover some of the, or if not all, of the innovative products that are in the pipeline or those that are about to come. So if I can have the next slide, please. Yeah, no problem. Just take your time. Anyway, so what I will talk to you about is really the novel food regulation. It's a European law, and it basically deals with what we call novel foods. Then I will speak a little bit about the authorization process, how basically novel foods are authorized. I will tell you also there is another category of foods which are under the same regulation, but we call them traditional foods. You'll see why. Then cover a little bit the union list. That's basically a list, a database of all the authorized novel foods. How the novel food regulation interacts with other European Union regulations when it comes to food safety, because one thing that should be apparent and I should make clear is that there is a mesh of regulations that are really interlinked to ensure that all foods that we have in Europe are safe. Then I'll tell you about another database which is not legally binding but is very helpful, called the Novel Food Catalog, and how that, and the Food Information Portal about how to get information. The process under which somebody may consult whether food is novel or not. how procedures are terminated when authorization is not in the pipeline, and then spend the last minutes about how the novel foods and innovation really interact, and how it really they interplay, so to speak. Next slide, please. So that's basically the novel food regulation. It's regulation 2015-2283. I have to apologize because I will be using some of the EU jargon, but if you want to find that regulation on the internet, that's the link you should use, regulation EU 2015-2283. 2015 is the date that it was adopted. 2283 is basically its serial number. And basically, the purpose of that regulation is to ensure two things. The first one is functioning of the internal market, and at the same time, a high level of protection of human health and consumer interests. Next slide, please. So, what does the regulation say? The regulation says that novel foods must be safe. That's Article 7. Also, they must not mislead the consumer, especially when a novel food is introduced and is intended to replace another food which is not novel. Okay? And it must not be nutritionally disadvantageous when it is intended again to replace another food. So we have safety, we have no misleading, and it has to be nutritionally equivalent or better than the food that is intended to replace. Next slide, please. Now, definition, because obviously, what is a novel food? Basically, a novel food is a food that was not used for human consumption to a significant degree before 15 May 1997. Why 15 May 1997? Simply because that was the first time that a regulation on novel foods, the older novel food regulation, which doesn't longer is in force, was adopted. It's an arbitrary, if you wish, administrative date signaling the beginning of regulation of European regulations to basically ensure the safety of new foods, novel foods that were to be introduced. Significant degree, what does it mean? Basically, in a member state, no matter how small, or in a big part of a member state. Yeah. Uh, there are some foods, for example, that are consumed in some member states, not in others. If a member state or somebody can prove that the food was consumed in a member state or in a big area of that member state, then it is not a novel food. There are 10 categories of novel foods, depending on the way they're made, the production, their origins, what have you. I have put here four, which I think are interesting in the sense, in the context of innovation that we're speaking about. Category one is a food that is new or intentionally modified molecular structure. Imagine you take, for example, sugar from a plant and you add something to it, that would become immediately a novel food ingredient and therefore would need to be authorized. A food consisting or isolated from microorganisms, fungi, or algae. Okay. Um, and then food consisting of or isolated or produced from cell cultures or tissue cultures. You may have heard situations where now there is discussion about cultivated meat or cultured meat or in laboratory grown meat, whatever the term is. Obviously, all these terms are not exactly accurate. Then food consisting of engineered nanomaterials, basic materials that are specifically and intentionally manufactured at the nanoscale in order to perform a nano-label function in the food that are added. These are the four that are more. There are others, like I said, in the six categories, which more or less would qualify for novel food. But I think when you talk about the edge of innovation, these four categories are probably the more fitting. The others are most likely using production techniques that have not been traditionally used, from animal tissues, things like that. So basically, more or less, if I can say, is that standard type of innovative practices where these are a bit more on the avant-garde side. Next slide, please. Now, I can give you some of examples. So new molecular structures, microorganisms you have for plants and their or part of the plants. Some are mineral oleogens, some salts, for example, animals and their parts. Here, what we have on the picture is insects, which we have which we have authorized as novel foods recently. and then cells or tissue cultures that are derived from animals. And then, of course, engineered nanomaterials, and you can see there an example. Next slide, please. More so, specific example. This time, newly synthesized or isolated products, synthetic lycopene. Lycopene, for those of you familiar, is basically an ingredient of tomatoes. It gives the red color, but the synthetic one is a novel food because there hadn't been significant consumption of the synthetic form of this. Calcium fructoborate, methyl nicotinamide chloride, chemicals, basically chemicals that can be used as ingredients and not necessarily also in food, but also in food supplements. Some of them are in food supplements, it's important. New processes, a mushroom powder, vitamin D mushroom powder. In that case, basically mushrooms are irradiated with UV in order to increase their content in vitamin D and therefore be richer in vitamin D, if you wish. Iron hydroxide adipate tartrate an engineered nanomaterial in order to deliver iron in food supplements, so people who are needing iron. The same with UV treated baker's yeast, simple yeast again treated with UV to increase in content in the vitamin D. Krill from the Antarctic krill from Euphrasia superba, basically a little krill for which is used as an ingredient or as food supplement. Like I said, lycopene from a plant this time, and astaxanthin from another Hematococcus pluvialis, which is another algae. And astaxanthin is a known antioxidant. It is also responsible for the pink color of salmonoid fish, like trout or salmon. Okay, these are concrete examples of novel foods that have been authorized in the European Union according to the provisions of the regulation. Next slide, please. Now, how do you go about to authorize a novel food? I think it's clear according to the novel food regulation, a novel food that is not authorized may not be placed lawfully in the market. If it's placed, it's illegal and should be seized by the authorities. It has to go through an application process in order for its safety to be assessed. Novel food applications are done according to the Article 10 of that regulation, and basically it's an applicant. In most instances, you have a company, but it can be in a member state, it can be a non-EU member state, or a person that represents somebody, for example, a consulting company, or an entity that represents several applicants. So that is the applicant submits an application. When the application is validated, meaning that the Commission and EFSA assess to see if it's complete and if it's suitable for an evaluation. And suitable means it not only contains all the elements that are necessary, but also the elements are sufficient to allow EFSA to conduct this risk assessment. And then the information is given to the public. It's summaries, and according to the new transparency regulation, I won't go into detail for that. Basically, there is a need to put some of the studies out, summaries of the studies, key findings, so that the public knows for each application what was done, what is the food, what are the conditions of use, and what is the safety data that supports the application. Then you have an evaluation by the European Food Safety Authority. This is really the major instrument, the major agency, the major authority in the European Union that assesses the safety of foods. No fees are charged for applications. Once EFSA delivers its opinion, and depending on its outcome, if it's a positive opinion, then the novel food, it is authorized. It is authorized by the Commission, by what we call an implementing regulation, basically a regulation which is immediately effective, which is voted by a standing committee of a member state. So it's both the Commission and member states that are authorizing it. There are, of course, time limits for each step. In other words, EFSA has 9 months to deliver an opinion. After an opinion is delivered, the Commission has 7 months to present a proposal for a vote. Make a long story short, and as you can see on the last bullet point, it takes between 18 to 20 months from the time an application is submitted to the product to be authorized. Of course, if the outcome of the EFSA evaluation is not positive, then the novel food is not authorized, and we have what we call the termination procedure that we'll talk later on. Or it may be that the opinion has certain conditions that need to be added, for example, labeling or decreased levels versus what the applicant asked, and those are incorporated into the authorizing regulations. In the past, it used to take longer under the old novel food regulation because it was a dual system of the applications going to member states, and only if member states disagreed with the outcome of one member state's assessment, it went to EFSA, and then it was authorized. So it took a much longer than what it is now. Next slide, please. And now this is schematically how really the application for a novel food authorization works. So you have the application on top, then it comes to the commission. You have an electronic e-submission system that all applications comes. If there are situations, for example, that already safety data exists for an application to allow for its authorization without consulting EFSA. Imagine, for example, that you have a food that has been authorized and somebody comes and says, I would like to change the condition in order for use, and that condition of use was already assessed by EFSA in the previous application. You don't need to reconsult EFSA for that. Therefore, the process will be immediately to go on what we call in the authorization step. That's the third column from the left. If, however, and that is the vast majority rule, EFSA is consulted, and that's the very right of the slide. Basically, the EFSA is consulted by the commission. We ask basically the EFSA to deliver an opinion on the given food. 9 months are needed, and then after that, again, I don't want to repeat it. If we have a positive outcome, we have 7 months to present a proposal to the standing committee. And then once this is voted favorably and the implementing regulation is published, the novel food is added to the authorizing, to the union list of authorized novel foods. Next slide, please. So the EFSA risk assessment of novel foods, maybe you hear more later today or tomorrow, but basically EFSA assesses all these things that you see here listed. Basically the identity, is this really correctly identified, and what are the elements that identify the novel food. The production process, very, very important, because there the applicant must document very, very carefully and in great detail how the food is produced, because every step of the process of production may entail hazards and concomitant risks to the health of the consumers. Compositional data, the applicant must document that the production process is steady and stable and coherent enough to produce a product that is compositionally consistent. Specifications basically is the elements, the key elements of the food that would characterize it, but also are essential for its safety and its quality. The history of use, if there may be history of use either in a natural form, and now we have the synthetic, or you may have a history of use in other parts of the world. The proposed use and use levels and the resulting intakes. For example, if you are to use novel food X in food Y at Z levels, what is really the intake that you would anticipate if, for example, were to use insect flour in bread and people ate in the bread. Yeah, that kind of thing. So the applicant must provide that. And of course, then it comes to the point which has to do with safety studies, the absorption, distribution, metabolism, and excretion, or known as ADME studies, nutritional information, and then toxicological information, which involves basically genotoxicity, but also subchronic toxicity, and if necessary, additional studies depending on the outcome of those. Overall toxicological information from the public domain or other studies that the applicant may have conducted, and then allergenicity. Because a lot of these foods, as you know, there are food allergies, and products and foods that contain proteins mainly can provoke or induce allergies to people, and that's therefore something that needs to be taken care of. The bottom that I have here is a link about the guidance. This is a guidance that EFSA has put together for potential applicants so that they can follow and really submit applications that are really good and therefore stand a good chance of being positively evaluated, at least in terms of their content. Next slide, please. Now, this shows you, and this is really a site from the Commission's novel food site, and basically this is the summaries. Yeah, depending on the year, every time we have an application that goes to EFSA, in other words, is validated by the Commission for its completeness and by EFSA for its suitability, containing, in other words, the elements, and the elements are suitable for risk assessment, we put an application out. And this is how you can find the application per year. So 2018, when the novel food regulation went into effect, until today. So there is constantly updated with new applications of novel foods that have gone to EFSA. Okay, as you can see on the third line, here is it's a house cricket, which is an insect, of course, that has been authorized. Next slide, please. This, I'm sorry, it's a busy slide, but this, we have tried very hard to have different ways of portraying this, but this gives you a bit of the range of novel foods application that we're receiving, plants and their parts. The blue, the lighter blue is microorganisms, fungi or algae. Green is modified molecular structures. The red is the production process, so a food that is produced by a different production process. The orange is animals and their part. The very deep blue purple is cell culture and tissue cultures. As you can see, we don't have that many. Only in 2018 we had a few, couple, if you can see here at the bottom. The yellow is an exclusive in food supplements. Then the gray is material of mineral origin. Again, not many of them. In 2018, you can see there is one. And then the green is vitamins, minerals, and other substances. So a wide range of things that you could see coming in the novel food. Next slide, please. Now, there's another category of novel foods, and they're subject to the regulation, and these are called the traditional foods from a third country. Basically, what we're talking about here is our foods that have not been consumed in the European Union, but they are consumed as staple food or to a significant degree in a country outside the Union. To give you an example, chia seeds. Chia seeds are a traditional food in some of the other countries, or quinoa for the matter, and insects, but they've never been used in the European Union. And therefore, they cannot be marketed unless they're authorized under the novel food regulation, but as traditional foods. And there, a traditional food can only be something which is produced from plants, animals, microorganisms. And there are some examples here from primary productions and are processed or unprocessed. These are the only three categories. So you cannot have a food with a new chemical structure and call it traditional food, because that means you have actually process the food chemically to produce something else, and therefore immediately would go into the other category, the novel food category, another traditional food. So they cannot be mineral origin, they cannot be a new process. All the things that you see at the bottom cannot be traditional foods. So we're talking really a limited range of foods, mainly around primary productions of plants, animals, and microorganisms that have been used as foods in a third country. Next slide, please. I told you already, chia seeds, the baobab fruit is another one, and noni juice. These are basically traditional foods that have come from non-EU countries and are currently marketed in the European Union. Next slide, please. Now, how is this authorization process taking place? For traditional foods, you still need to have information on the identity, the production process, the specifications, the composition. But where they differ with the novel foods is the fact that the weight of evidence for evaluating the safety of those novel food is not toxicological studies, the one that I mentioned, genotoxicity, subchronic, or what have you, but data, documented data on the history of consumption of this food in the third country. Yeah, and that needs to be at least 25 years. So an applicant of a traditional food must provide documented evidence found in the public domain, found in that country where the food is used. It could be recipes, it could be packaged products, what have you, but must provide documented data and information demonstrating that this food has been consumed for at least 25 years safely in a third country. How does it work? Again, an application is given, but in this particular case, once the Commission decides that this notification is valid, it is evaluated by both EFSA and the member states. So you have basically 28 different evaluations, EFSA and 27 member states. If all of them agree that the evidence given is okay and it's acceptable and indeed supports the safety of the food, then the traditional food is authorized. However, if even one of those 28 parties raised reasoned safety objections, what does mean raised safety objections? Basically say, we don't think the safety of this food has been established because, and they have to give the reasons, which are scientific, technical. The production process is no good. They didn't provide enough information on the history of use, what have you. And therefore, this is not authorized as traditional food, even if one of these 28 evaluating bodies raises objections. We inform the applicant, and the notification is turned into a novel food authorization, in which case it follows the path of the tradition on a normal food. In other words, resubmitted as an application with data addressing the objections that were raised during the evaluation as a traditional food. Next slide, please, and I hope it's not too complicated. There you are. I think this schematically gives you a little bit the situation with traditional food authorization. Let's try the right side first. There is a notification. It comes into the e-submission system of the Commission. Commission validates again. Is it complete? Does it have all the elements? Yes. Okay. Then we validate it. And then it goes to member states and EFSA, who has 4 months to evaluate the data that is submitted with the notification and pronounce whether they have objection or not. If there are no objections, then the traditional food is authorized again by an authorizing regulation, and the union list is updated. If there are objections, then it's turned into an application that the applicant has to submit to the Commission an application on the same food with data demonstrating and addressing the points raised in the objections. Then EFSA has 6 months to evaluate that. And then if that is positive, again, the normal sequence of authorization is followed with the Commission within 3 months has to again have an implementing authorizing act to the standing committee. And then if it's voted favorably by the member states, the union list is updated. A bit complicated for this. When you have no objection, it's very straightforward and very quick. If you have objection, obviously becomes a bit more complicated because there are safety elements. The bottom line is, however, that for these foods, the history of consumption is sufficient, but again, the system is very, very strict to ensure that traditional foods that may come from other countries are evaluated for safety on the same level as the novel foods that are produced in the European Union and follow the previous procedure. Yeah? Next slide, please. This is the summary of notifications. The same way as we had summary of applications, here we have summary of notifications, again, per year, per product. You can see here in 2019, we had the cacao fruit pulp. Basically, after you remove the beans of the cacao, sorry, then what's left, you can use it as a traditional food because it's been used in other continents as food source. So that's basically the situation when it comes to notification for traditional foods. Next slide, please. It shows you a little bit of snapshot of how many traditional foods you have. Not that many. A lot of them have difficulties establishing the safety of in use. We have a number of applications, but not that many authorized because really a lot of the it's taking a little bit longer than foreseen for applicants to understand what exactly is needed. It's getting a little better lately. So as you can see, you have 3 in 2018, 2 in 2020, 1 in 2021, 1 in 2022, and 2 so far in 2023. Next slide, please. Hit it again because I need to see both sides. Once more, please. Thank you so much. Now, for oops, we have to go back now. Okay, thank you. My apologies. Basically, the novel food also has provisions for confidentiality and data protection. Confidentiality, as you can imagine, is basically a situation where some of the information submitted to the application needs to be remain confidential because obviously it has to do with the fact that it might damage disclosure of that information might damage the interests of the applicant. Imagine that somebody has developed a unique, innovative way of producing the food and does not want others to have access to it. Therefore, they require confidentiality or some of the safety data. However, as you can see here on the text, it is very, very important to note that you cannot claim confidentiality for the studies if they really are um, uh, are essential for the demonstration of the safety of the food. In other words, the public needs to know the main elements of the safety data that supports a food, even if the applicant has claimed confidentiality. In that case, for example, the report, the study itself is not published, but the EFSA opinion contains the main elements that led to its conclusions. Okay. On the right side of the slide, we have another feature which is called the data protection. And that is basically an applicant can request the protection of data that they have generated in support of the application so that others cannot use it. What does it mean basically? Very simple. Uh, it allows the applicant to have exclusive right of marketing of the product authorized under that application for 5 years. It basically gives a little bit of a benefit to applicants for having spent the money to conduct the studies. Why is that? Because as a rule, novel food authorizations are generic. In other words, anybody can place the food once it's authorized the market, provided the conditions of use and the specifications are met. I'll show you in a bit in the union list. However, when there is data protection, no one can market that product, even if it's the same conditions of use and specifications, because it is the data is protected. They cannot use that. They can either obtain the data from the applicant to submit their own application and for the same food, or generate their own data and submit an application. And that is only for 5 years. After 5 years, the data protection is gone and the authorization becomes generic. Next slide, please. The union list. Press the button a little bit. The union list of authorized novel food is basically where foods, novel foods, whether they're traditional or novel, end up when they're authorized. This is a list that you can find how many and under what conditions and what under specifications the novel foods are authorized to be marketed, placed in the market in the European Union. It has two tables. Table one is the one we see, which basically says what are the conditions to be used. In other words, what are the food categories and what are the maximum levels can be used. In bread, at X percent. In pasta, X percent. In milk-based drinks, Y percent. Things like that. It has additional safety labeling requirement. For example, there are foods, like I told you about allergy. There's also another situation where said if the food, if it's used in food supplements, the food supplements may not be used if other foods contained in the novel food is to be consumed. So there are a number of requirements that can be added. There may be a requirement for monitoring in the marketplace, for the applicant to monitor the product in the marketplace in order to detect how is it doing in the market in terms of specific attributes. And then, of course, the data protection is listed there so that another applicant will know that they cannot place the market the same food because it is protected. And hit another button because there may be another situation on the table two here, or is in the yes. And the table two is the specifications. Basically, all the elements in the novel food that determine its character and how is this novel food in terms of safety and in terms of quality. The critical elements in the composition of the novel food and its characteristics that allow the safety and quality, and that is for the applicants, for other applicants that want to place the same food in the market, but also for enforcement authorities when it comes to analyzing the foods that are in the market to see if they really are compliant with the authorized specifications. Next slide, please. For example, this is an example of table one. Here you have on the left side the novel food. In the middle, next to it, you have the specified food category and the levels that are used. In this particular case, calcium fructoborate is used in food supplements. These are the maximum levels, 220 milligrams per day. The labeling is there. Here it says it should not be consumed, for example, by the population in 18 years of age and by pregnant and lactating women. That should be on the food supplements when somebody buys it so that they cannot do it. And then there's data protection element on the very right side of the slide. Next slide, please. And this is the specification of the same novel food. It basically gives a description definition. This may include the molecular formula and also how is it made, because there may be specific elements in the production process that need to be included. And then the characteristics, composition, some of the information on the heavy metals, but also microbiological criteria. That food, when that application becomes generic, anyone in the market in the union can put it in the market, provided these specifications and the condition and use of the previous slide are met. Yeah. And the union is exactly full of those for all the novel foods that we have already authorized. Next slide, please. This shows you the updates of the union list. The union list was established in 2017. It's basically the first that you see on the left, which says Union List of Authorized Novel Foods, Commission Implementing Regulation 2017-2470. And every time there is a new food, novel food that is added, it's added to the Union List by a Commission Implementing Regulations, as you can see on both below that and on the right side of the slide. Next slide, please. This is what we have in the union list. We have totally 119 that are authorized in novel foods. We have 118 that are also authorized as novel foods and in food supplements, and 56 that are authorized only in food supplements. Next slide, please. Just to be clear, the novel food regulation does not apply, and I think now we're going to the part about novel food and other EU regulations. The novel food regulation does not apply to all these things that you hear. So you cannot be a novel food and be a genetically modified food. You either or. And it doesn't apply to the other food enzyme additives and flavorings if they're used as such. In other words, you may have a novel food that is used as a food ingredient, and that's a novel food, but it may also have this novel food be used as a food additive. Lycopene that we discussed is a good example because it is used as an ingredient as a novel food, but also is using as a food additive, in other words, a processing aid for some of the foods because of the antioxidant condition. So in case of part B, you can be both, but the applicant must be clear and ready to respond to questions from authorities as to what the uses are. But the GMO and novel food are mutually exclusive. You can be either or, but not both. Okay? Next slide, please. And these are the examples of substances that I told you. Lycopene is one of them, that you can have it as a food additive or as a novel food. In lactitol, you have it as a food additive, a novel food, and there's a health claim. And the same for methylcellulose, which is used as a food additive, but also as a novel food. It's just examples of where you can have dual lives for a particular food ingredients. Next slide, please. The novel food catalog now, that this is another database. It is not legally binding, so it is not part of the novel food regulation, but it is a non-binding catalog, non-legally binding catalog, which summarizes the views of member states about the novel food status of foods that they have been examining over the years since novel foods were introduced in the Union. And basically that gives a guidance to potential applicants as to whether the food that they're talking about is considered by member state as being novel or not novel. Next slide, please. It is non-exhaustive. It only refers to those foods that have been discussed. So if you don't find the food there, you must not assume that it's not novel or it's novel, because it might be, it still hasn't discussed. So it's a non-exhaustive database, just a summary of discussions had on the member states. When somebody visits the novel food catalog, these are the different signs you see. The green on the top means that it is not novel, therefore the food was marketed before 1997. The FS in the blue background means that it is non-novel when it's used in food supplements. The X on the red means that it is not. It is not novel food. And the question mark in an orange background means that somebody has been asked or is asking, in the process of asking, doing a consultation as to whether this is a novel food or not, and whether it requires authorization non-food or not. Next slide, please. And this how we would look from now on, because we're in the in the process of changing. I don't want to repeat the same things, but you can see, as if you visit that in the next maybe in a month or so, you will find this kind of signalization now. The first one is not novel in food, not novel in food supplements, non-novel food not yet authorized, and subject to consultation. Again, the four categories, different signalization, the ones I mentioned. Next slide, please. And this is how the novel food catalogs. If you visit the site and you put EU novel food catalog, you will see it's alphabetically, and it has all the different materials, foods, plants, whatever chemicals that have been used, and a description and the outcome of this consultation. The discussion of the member states. Next slide, please. And this is how it would look. It is updated again on the basis of discussion of the member states or consultations. And if it's not in the novel food catalog, then it doesn't mean that it's novel. Like I said before, you really need to look if there is any information on this, either in the member state or in the public domain, or do a consultation. Next slide, please. This is the portal you can visit in order to find out on information about food. How does it, if there are any consultations, if there is information about the novel food procedures, the novel food catalog, you can visit the portal of the European Union. Next slide, please. And that's in the Disante, by the way. And there it is. This is the portal page. You can see information on food additives, on health claims, food flavoring, and it will also include very soon novel foods that have not been included. It's in the process of being updated. Next slide, please. Now, if somebody is unsure about the status of a food, they can do what we call a consultation. The consultation is done according to the procedure of Article 4 of the Novel Food Regulation. And basically what it says is, I have a food that I don't know if it's novel or not. What will? I can consult the competent authorities of the EU member state where I first intend to place the product in the market. There is a regulation that tells you how to do this and what are the elements. Basically, you need to provide information. And there, I think if you believe it's not novel, you need to provide information arguing that it's not novel. If not, you just ask the question and provide any information you are available, you are in a position to gather from the public domain as to is it or is it not novel. And there's a list of member state competent authorities that basically you send the consultation to them. Next slide, please. And this is again in the DG Santé, the Commission Health and uh, Food Safety Director General internet site, and the novel food site, of course, the consultations. These are the different types of the name and the date that it was published, the outcome, and the document. The reasons why justifying the statement. And you can see here, novel when used on food, sometimes it's not novel, the bottom one here, and so on and so forth. Next slide, please. Now, termination is basically, uh, it's in respect to the fact that if you have an application notification that is not valid, in other words, before even EFSA or the member states evaluate it, is it because outside the scope of the regulation, or there is not enough information, or the applicant did not provide information, or studies have not been previously notified, because that's also a case. Therefore, the Commission terminates the procedure. And this is done by a Commission decision, which is addressed to the applicant, explaining the reason why the application was not considered valid. The same process is followed if EFSA delivers a negative opinion or an inconclusive opinion. Okay? Next slide, please. Now, I'll spend a few, 4 minutes, actually 5 minutes, because I see here my timer, about food innovation. Um, this is very important. I think others who mentioned it that are better qualified than me, but it's very, very important to consider that from the regulatory point of view and the policy point of view, the food innovation is a key driver to certain political priorities in the European Union Green Deal and the Farm to Fork strategy. And the three elements, and I think Carlos mentioned them before: safety, food security, and sustainability. I put sustainability in quotation mark because there is always a difference in defining this. But as we all understand it, is the idea is that we have a continuum without really imposing on next generations and the resources of the earth and next generations possibility to live the same way we are. It also means dietary shifts and healthy diets, which might also include reducing waste. And of course, it entails environmental, social, and ethical elements. Next slide, please. Now, some challenges and expectations that we have seen from our side in discussing also with applicants and different stakeholders. It can be seen at both. It's creative, yeah. You move into something else which is greener, more sustainable, better production or consumption, but also it may be disruptive in the sense that it might challenge some of the well-embedded traditional cultural and ethical codes that we're having, yeah. And therefore, because of this dichotomy, it carries high expectations and challenges both for civil society, from the food business operators, and for regulators. Next slide, please. Challenges and expectations for civil society. It's true, it offers new experiences, alternative foods, that things that have not been tried before. It also addresses or may address environmental, ecological, climate needs. You hear stories about better life cycle, lower emissions of gases, less energy, things like that. Addresses also moral and ethical or religious requirements. People who don't like to eat animals or they have different dietary needs. Animal welfare is also very important. On the other hand, it may not be seen as natural. It could be foreseen as, what's called Frankenstein food, created in the laboratory, and therefore it's not nutritious, is not healthy, whatever. It also questions certain paradigms of food production. As some of you know, there's a culture around food production in many parts of Europe, if not all. And therefore, if you go to replace it to something else, what impact would that have on that? It must be obviously brilliant to be safe, nutritious, wholesome, and tasty. The acceptance elements by the consumers. Is it the same as the one that I'm used to having over the years? The price is an important element. And like I said, taste and texture. Is it really the same as the one that we're having now? Or is it intended to replace or partially replace? For business operators, obviously they need a solid regulatory framework. They need to know where are we in terms of regulation, which one is the regulation we need to work with, and of course, to be able to place these products early on the market. There are technical and scientific challenges, scaling up production in some situations, and of course, the data that support the safety and sustainability, because safety is one element, we have it, but sustainability in terms of ecological life cycle analysis, emissions, probably is data that some of the most innovative food needs to be created. Next slide, please. For regulators, the legal framework to deal with safety, which is the first essential step. Also important will be to have proper safety data. And then, of course, each step of the production needs to be carefully looked at. And of course, civil society and food business expectations, some of how people perceive it, what is the name that you could give in some of them, and so on. Next slide, please. In our case, at least when it comes to food safety, the regulation of novel foods, although it was established in 2015, it was considered the forward-looking anticipatory mode. From what we know today, and of course that's subject to testing, most of the upcoming innovative foods, if not all, will be covered. So innovation in terms of safety will be covered because the categories that I mentioned, the 10 categories, really capture. They're generic enough to capture, yet specific enough to be addressing specific situations. And insects, alternative proteins, newly synthesized novel foods, food supplements are already on our pipeline. We have received applications. Fermentation products have already been assessed, what we call precision fermentation. Culture meat, we don't have an application, but if it comes and if it's not used on the GMOs, using GMO techniques, it will be a novel food. And therefore, we feel that the right novel food regulation, it really has all the elements to address a food innovation when it comes to safety. And I think this is all I have, but next slide, please. Yes, thank you very much. I would invite you to visit the sites here that we have. And of course, if you have any questions, please send them to us and we'll be able to answer. I thank you very much for your attention. I think I went over in 1 minute. I apologize and thank you very much for your attention.